All right. I'm Coffee Kevin, and I'm here with Mike Ebert. We were talking about when we met.
Well,
What daycare center were we in when we met? We've
it's
known each other
quite a
for
while,
yeah.
somewhere between 15 and 35 years ago, something like that.
It was man, it was a while back, and let's see. Now, go ahead and list for me just a few of the people you've worked with over the years.
Well, it all got started mid 80s at Coffee Bean, which became Gloria Jean's Gourmet Coffees. Started when they had two stores. Actually started as a carpenter's apprentice for Ed Cavetco.
For Ed,
Yeah, so people who know Ed Cavetco in the industry, he was the interesting personality that all the stories have been led to believe. But the only question I asked in the interview is, can I get 40 hours a week? Because other carpenters I had worked for, and let's just say it wasn't that steady. And he goes, my wife's got these two coffee shops, and we've got a warehouse that's dirty. There's something over there. So within 2 weeks, that's all I was doing was mixing flavored coffees in bags, shake and
yeah.
bake we called it, and in a warehouse, which was one step above flipping burgers at McDonald's. Nothing against that as a career, but it wasn't what I was expecting at that time. And then flash forward 10 years, I was plant manager, buying 4 million pounds of coffee a year, 50 employees, making every mistake known to man, but learning as you go, you know.
But what an introduction, and how the industry has changed.
It's amazing. I tell this in classes that I teach all the time that, in 1985, our differentiating point in coffee, we're 100% Arabica. That was it. That was it. Maybe it's a couple days older, not realizing that, more of the world's production is not specialty and is Arabica, not realizing everything else we've learned since then. But it was kind of a basic marketing premise and I think most of us pronounce it Arabica, just to sound different, I
Yeah,
think.
I think so too. Do you ever miss the coffee as it was?
No,
No. Okay.
no. No.
Was it bad coffee?
No, it wasn't bad coffee. Yeah, I mean, people. This gets into kind of flash forward today. Where have we come? How far have we come? And all I can tell you is the last 10 years or so, I've tasted more flavors, more different things, more subtle notes, more complexity in coffee than probably the 20 years before. Not to knock any of that coffee. It's just we've learned so much more. The farmer has learned, the work that's being done, how to package it and ship it to us, grain pro bags, roasting, which I'm sure we're going to talk more about. I mean, just immensely what you and I had the same coffee 30 years ago from the same farm, and you said, how do you roast it? You might say, to 415 degrees, I took it to a Viennese. And I'd say, well, I took it to a full city in 420, and thinking we were talking the same language when we weren't even on the same page.
Right.
It really didn't mean anything, Flash forward today where we talk about profiles and different reactions and extending them or diminishing them, and we can take the same coffee and taste, roasted three different ways and have three different experiences that are all wonderful, And
Right.
back then we didn't even understand it. I miss it from the standpoint of the newness and there was no predetermined what is specialty. We were all kind of figuring it out, so it was fun to a certain extent. It wasn't quite the job it's become, even though I love it. But
It was reckless.
yes, you could say that. You could say that.
I remember going to Stop and Shop and Crate and Barrel. Stop and Shop had. I'm trying to remember the name of the company. It was anyway. They had things like old government Java, and things that labeled that. I have no idea what the
Java.
beans really were.
Yeah, if there's one thing I miss, there is certain, but this is going to make me sound like the old guy in the room, lamenting back to something that maybe or maybe didn't exist.
Well, it's part of the fun of our being
because
able to
taste
do
is
this.
very subjective to
Yeah.
where you're at and all that, and think of your best meals in the last year. How many of them were the food really exceptional, or was it just good company and good atmosphere? So, thinking back to when I got into coffee, but things like we were just talking about this in a class I taught last week on how Sumatras, and this is kind of a industry-wide thing, just aren't what I remember them.
No, me either. Yes.
They're completely different. Javas, in fact, particular. Some student asked me from China last week in a roasting class, does Java work in a espresso blend? And I said, well, if you think it tastes good, then it works. I said, but I haven't seen any Javas on many offering lists in 15, 20 years. So it's one of those kind of elusive. But then there's also the side of it where so much of it was, like what's Mocha Java? What's Harar, what's Kona style. We've gotten away from some of that let's say, less than honest approach to how we marketed our coffees.
Even George Hull used to cut his mocha java, and he claimed a Yemen. I'm trying actually with George. I'm
Right.
not. Don't doubt it. He had a Yemen and a Java, and then he had Colombian. He had Colombian. Always had a third ingredient in there because to try to keep a consistency to it as well.
Exactly.
But,
Exactly.
you know, it's amazing to me. Yeah, there's very little, but I know for sure a lot of mocha javas, and of course you and I survived and lived through the Kona, where it was founded, right? Costa Rican coffees were being shipped to Hawaii and something
Actually,
like
being
that.
shipped to Berkeley.
Oh,
Yeah. And it was at that time.
not quite
I was
Hawaii.
I was buying a couple hundred bags of Kona extra fancy for Gloria Jeans. It was a big Christmas seller. I wasn't buying from that particular entity at the time, and it wasn't because I suspected they were doing something fraudulent, because I didn't know back then. It tasted really good,
Yeah.
you know, so they did put in really good Costa Rican and really good Panama into it, but how was I to know? It was just more a shaking the owner's hand, where you had a, ooh, and then there was a gentleman by the name, I don't know if you recall this name, John O'Bergen, with Kona Kava, and he actually brought microlots. And so at the end of my stay at Gloria Jeans, I walked away from Kona Kai, went to John O'Bergen for microlots of Kona that were really, you know, you can taste differences between them, and I thought had a better story, more expensive. And then 6 months later, the whole Kona Kai scandal broke, where, yes, they were, you know. And the funny thing about that is, or the sad thing is, they didn't even, wasn't technically illegal in this country. They went away for tax evasion.
Oh,
Wasn't
they
even-
always get them on that.
Yeah, they get them on
always
that.
get
It's
'em
like
on
Al
the tax.
Capone, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember way back then. I remember even doing private label for people who would ship me in Kona and to a Kona blend, and it was a pallet of high-grown Mexicans or a good coffee,
Good
and then
coffee,
one
right.
little bag of Kona.
Yeah.
And I asked, well, how do I blend this? 1 or 2 beans at a time in every 200-pound batch? They're like, no, just look at the Kona bag as you roast it. Then I have a problem with this.
You know, one of the things that I sometimes hearken back to, though, that I think used to be better, and stop me if I'm wrong.
Sure.
I'm very, I know you're very capable of doing that, and I want you to. Is blending. I always think, in some ways, what I miss is before, and as much as I really enjoy, first of all, the transparency. I mean, you got to admire that. There's
Right.
more transparency. I feel way
I
more.
agree completely.
And then we could really zero in on. You could actually get and know. You could look at probably a GPS in Colombia and know where the farm is, and the farm that's producing the coffee that I'm having this morning.
Exactly.
That's a wonderful thing. I don't want that to change at all. On the other hand, I really miss the art of blending. You had no idea what the coffees really were, but
Have you been listening to my last few weeks of classes? Because this is-
Are you talking about this?
Yeah,
Okay,
we've been
go
talking
ahead.
about
Yeah.
blending, and it's interesting because, you know, when I first started blending, it started at Gloria Jeans, Coffee Bean at that time. I was given the spiral notebook that had all the recipes that I'd supposedly paid a lot of money for down some back alley at some coffee shop. I don't know if that's true or not.
well,
and- It did,
I kind of
probably
believe
was,
it.
but there was no, and so that's what we followed, and I never swayed from it in the early years, not realizing that as crops came in that were different, they were changing. We weren't being consistent with it. Well, flash forward to the mid '90s, and I had just joined. So after Gloria Jeans, they got sold, and I saw what Megalomania does to. They destroyed a really great business. Say what you will about Ed, he was interesting to work for, but the new group that came in wasn't so good. So I left and went to work for Coffee Masters, and within a couple of years, the one of the founders, it was a husband-wife couple, Jan Rich, was writing an article for Gourmet Retailer, because at the time we didn't have Roast, we didn't have Barista magazine, we had Tea and Coffee, which was international in scope and didn't really talk about what we wanted to talk about. It was a whole different type of magazine. So I agreed to write an article about coffee, and I was all thrilled, and I found what the headache of having an article due every other month at a due date, how stressful that is. But one of them I wrote was The Art of the Blend, and this was like 95, and I was lamenting the fact that they were going away. probably for good reasons, albeit for what we were just talking about. Kona blend, Kona style,
Right.
Jamaican style, and we deserved to walk away from them for a certain period of time. And I said, but I want them to come back for, why a vintner makes a winemaker makes a good blend, to create something that doesn't exist by its individual parts. And at the end of it, actually, the article, I actually lamented the fact that we were also kind of looking at the coffee buyers or the professionals from Folgers and Hills Brothers, and we would never consider them specialty or real coffee people. And I made the argument that actually we need to bring them into our tent, because here's individuals that are taking, to create that red can of coffee that we won't talk about the level of quality or the flavors you get, but I can guarantee you this, that is going to be more consistent and have better quality control than any coffee anybody in the Specialty Coffee Association can do.
Yeah.
And luckily we don't have to be that, but
Right.
what they know in order to achieve that year after year, what blends, because they got a world of different coffees they've got to try to get in there, because it's big volume, that we can learn something and we can apply it to specialty coffee. I won't say I got hate email or letters, but I did get some requests to take away my specialty coffee guy cool card because they just didn't. And like we said, we didn't. Now it's starting to come back, and I just had a roasting professional class at my facility last week, and one of the things that we do during that week is create a blend. And there's really, it's not a test. There's no, you don't pass, and the only simple goal is, does it taste like too much like one of those individual components, or does it taste not necessarily better, but give you something different? That is the only goal, because the rest of it is subjective, and they all achieved it. It was a fun kind of week, where we had this deep conversation about, why blend, what purpose, it comes down to consistency and in some cases just keeping the price somewhat reasonable, which is still, even for a specialty coffee roaster, very important. But
Yes.
we still haven't brought back that romance of the blend, or the where we really talk about it, or the artistry of it, or one is, I think we're all afraid of it because it's very subjective, and nobody wants to really admit that. They want to, we really want to talk about black and white things instead of this. So,
well, and the I think the market clearly, hanging out at specialty trade shows like we do, it's very obvious to me that the market has decided they want to market this product as an individual as much as they can, to narrowcast it down, like I said, to the farm. And I like that. I have to say, I love that, when you hear, and it all makes sense. It's like the farm as opposed to the...
Yeah, I agree completely, but it also reinforces some lack of understanding when you say farm, or because I get this a lot where people, I just want to buy coffee that's from an individual farmer that I can shake their hand. Most of the famous lots that we name, the Roasters Intelligentsia, Stumptown, Counterculture, they all have their famous farms that they've made famous, and most of those are groups of families.
Right, they're really
levels
not.
of cooperatives. It's not just one guy.
It isn't Eddie Albert and
right.
Pitchfork.
So it's a little bit of a lack understanding. And look at, I love good wine, and you look at the bottle of a good Pinot or something like that. Very few of them are 100% Pinot. They're 80 or 90 something.
That's exactly
And there's
right,
other
right.
stuff in there to keep. And these are, I'm not just talking the stuff you go to Walmart and buy, which we should expect that. That's how they get that price point kind of consistent. I'm talking some of my world-class wines that I'll pay $50, $60 a bottle.
Still got,
have that same sort of, and it's okay there. But with us, that's somehow, so it's a little bit of, I think we're getting better. But sometimes...
Is the industry going to stand up at some point and say, we've got a right to do the same thing, and this is why, and it's not it's...
Well, I think we've got another issue that we've got to address, or it doesn't matter, and that's farmers. The price of coffee, and I don't have any magical answers, so I'm not gonna.
You think it's too low?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's way too low.
You and Mike Perry.
And all of us in the industry, it is not sustainable. Why would,
I've heard.
if you wanted to have an honest conversation with most of the farmers I've met, it's why are you doing this?
Right.
Why don't you go to the city and get a job? Why don't you plant a different crop? This is not. None of us would look at this as a business model, and yet here we in coffee. No, keep growing great coffee for me, and I'll pay you a few pennies, a few shekels more here and there. If you do it, it's a little bit disingenuous, and that's casting a wide net. So I'm not saying that, but it's
if it's not sustainable,
exactly.
who's gonna?
So
and then we don't deserve to get the kind of coffee.
It's hard
that I
to
like
get
to
into.
drink.
Do we need to, get beyond that when that issue is hanging over our head? But all I do know is there's some really smart people dealing with that issue. The former executive director of the Coffee Association, Rick Reinhardt, that's his task and his.
That's what Rick's doing now.
That's his retirement year, I guess, and I think it's going to keep him more busy than he worked before.
Well,
But
that happens a lot.
but it's a very complex issue, and it's one that I read on all the time. There's people who just look at the commodities market as the evil part of that. The C market needs to go away, and that's not the job of the C market.
What do you mean?
Commodities market. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that. That's the problem. That's
how do
what's
you
hurting.
Just for our audience? Most of our
Sure,
audience is
sorry.
not in the trade. Is it that's the Hills Hills Brothers?
Even the coffee that specialty roasters buy, the part of the price is still based on that commodities market. It
is. It
still
isn't completely separate. There aren't just two separate markets.
Yes and no.
Okay.
One is understand the market exists. Any commodities markets is to bring buyers and sellers together. And talk about levels of quality. Coffee, it's basically, physical defects, moisture level in the green coffee, and then there's the sensorial, okay, which of course is different on every market. Selling to a Hills Brothers, or if I'm an importer selling to a Intelligentsia here in Chicago, we're still talking about the same thing, okay. And then that is tied to a commodities market where that both buyers and sellers can mitigate their risk. They can, it gets into futures and options and puts and calls. So most farmers don't have access to it. Technically, they could use it, but it's beyond the scope of them.
Nice.
But that's kind of the glue that holds the current market together, okay? And even a specialty coffee, half the price, if I call up an importer today and I get what's known as a fixed price, so it includes everything, delivered at my door.
Right.
That includes, part of that is what the current C market is. And then there's a differential that we pay as a premium above that. Okay, so it is a tool that's used, but there's people who look at it as it's the C market's the problem. That's who's keeping the farmer down, and it's not. That system isn't designed. It's not meant to be helping the farmer. It's a whole different reason.
I wouldn't think so.
And it is important. Is it imperfect? Oh, yeah. We can have a whole show just about that.
But you don't think, you're not saying we should throw that market
No,
out.
no.
Okay.
What I'm saying is it's a very complex issue.
Okay.
Because even if every country's different. Every country has its own internal struggles. I mean, look around the world where coffee's grown. We
Yes.
think what's going on in this country with our politics right now and everything is crazy. It's nothing compared to what some of these countries have seen. Civil wars and others. So you add that element to it. And then I'd say overall lack of education of farmers and producers, which I think, especially coffee, we've come a long way with that. But letting them know what options are available, how to use some of these tools, and then the work that World Coffee Research is doing, which is an organization that people in the industry who hear this are probably going to. Some people criticize my comment like this, but I look at it as what they do is seed research. It's much more than that, but they're basically researching the seeds to give not only farmers more information on, hey, I'm in this climate, this is where I'm growing coffee, what could work here based on my aspect, my soil, how the sun comes up, the whole 9 yards, and what's available, and also tastes good. And a lot of that work's been done on, okay, we can fight disease, we can fight climate change, we can have better yields and all that. But there's that last element: does it taste good? And so that work's been done by major companies, not shared. Obviously, they've spent a lot of money on it.
Proprietary.
With World Coffee Research, which is kind of, I call it like a specialty coffee industry owned research organization, that's the work they're doing on. And they've made, again, that could be a whole podcast alone just in what they're doing when it comes to different seed research and new cultivars, hybrids that are meant to fight climate change, be disease resistant, but taste good. And it's even that work has even driven what I do in coffee education and how the new flavor wheel as a result of that
Right.
work. So, Ted created the flavor wheel in the early 90s. We needed one. Every other industries that had one, honey, beer, wine. We needed something to get away from this, coffee has 5,000 different words that we can say how it tastes. And which is fine. I don't want to take away from that.
Visual too,
Yeah. But for the industry internally to work together and even do this kind of work, we had to agree that no, it's really not that many. We can agree to calibrate that it's really, and what World Coffee Research found was about 100 plus different things that are in coffee, and that is already trained. So we're even using what they've already done to train the future generation better than what we were. And nothing against Ted and his early flavor wheel, but he didn't have the budget. Didn't have the resources available, but he gave us a tool, and I still use that original flavor wheel in my classes because it's on every training lab around the world. So I use it as a. Yes, there's some things that aren't factual on it. Yes, it's not based in sensory science, and again, nothing against that. It was a tool that got us to where we are today. Right. So I still use it, but I use it in a way of like, this is where we came from. This is where we are now.
Right.
Yeah, just to appreciate that what's happened in the last 20 years in coffee. I forget how far we've come. And if you think we didn't have some of this stuff.
Here's a question. How important is it, and how important is it for the producing countries to develop their own consumption of coffee? In other words, there are producing countries. When I went to Guatemala, one of the things that really surprised me, shocked me, I was fishing for an interview. I was hoping for the good old days, but these, like you'd get in France, to be honest, about wine, about, my grandfather, taught me the appreciation. I didn't get anything like that. I got some pretty horrible stories, actually, about, the treatment of workers. And it was not, the good coffee was all sent out of the country. Mm-hmm. No one had a chance to try it there, really, brewed how we brew it, and with that type of culture didn't really exist there.
Right.
How important is that to the quality of coffee?
I think that's one of the reasons why I made the comment that in the last 5 to 10 years I've had flavors in coffee and qualities that I've never experienced before. Because I now understand it. Because like you said, when I used to go to Origin, it was a pass-fail. This might kill somebody or make somebody sick. We got to keep it and consume it here. Right. Everything else we could sell. Now I'm being a little over the top there. We've come a long way. But it's one of the things that's also driving one of the concerns about coffee is we look at market changing, consumption is rising. Okay, not only in this country are we, per capita consumption has gone up, and we're back to getting close to where we were in the 70s. I don't think we'll ever get quite that high, but because it's a different time and there's a lot more competing products. But it's increasing here. But that's not why we are basically consuming all the coffee we grow every year. Okay, which is a concern. But you have emerging markets, so you have China, Russia, starting, fire dancer and teaching. That's how I started. It was going there. They're starting to drink more coffee, less tea, and better coffee. Most what there was instant. The other thing is consuming countries, or producing countries, excuse me. Mm-hmm. Brazil, I would bet you in the coming years is going to outpace North America consumption. Okay, which is an amazing. But you think of it, people think of Central South America as a third class, third world, and there are places. Yes, it is rough, but let's go to the south side of Chicago, or let's it's emerging middle class, and when you're middle class, you have a little bit disposable income, and you're going to school. Coffee becomes part of it. Some of my favorite cafes I've been to in the last 5 years have been at Origin. Guatemala, in particular, has some excellent ones. Colombia, and so what it's doing is even if that farmer doesn't own that cafe, they're now in a village or a town where they can go get coffee prepared in a way that they could get in the U.S. or in Europe. So they have that specialty coffee experience that we all love. And before, it was just a product they sold to us, and maybe they cupped around a cupping table to coffee buyers, and they knew their product was good, but it wasn't part of their own culture. So there was no,
that's got to be a huge difference, right? So, it's just an ego element.
Exactly. So seeing more of that, I think it needs to increase more. But then it all goes back to World Coffee Research. So it's not even the our farmers getting remunerated properly so they can grow this wonderful product. Right. Are we going to have enough coffee? with climate change and the like, right now reports are by 2030 probably, if not earlier, we may not have enough good coffee. So that's it. All goes back to that.
Are you panicked about that?
Yes and no. So here's the to dose it with a little reality. So I've been very actively involved in the coffee association,
Yes.
served on the board and the like, and was on the board when Rick Reinhardt was executive director and helped change and add symposium to what is offered. So it meant to be a higher level of that for somebody like me, but not to have coffee industry people talk to ourselves. Let's bring in true agricultural experts, sensory experts. We can learn from instead of just preaching to each other,
Right.
which is what we've done historically. And so it became, and it's actually a little side story about that in a second. That's how World Coffee Research got started, was a result of that. But every year Rick would give what became known as his doom and gloom speech. And it was kind of an hour of here from my perch where I sit, where I have all this data and I'm working with all the associations. This is the end of the coffee world as I see it now. And it was never meant to
That's
be
a nice pep talk.
Yes, but it was meant to be very honest.
Kind of like an Alec Baldwin.
Very very similar. And so every
Coffees
year
for
he would
closers.
give, basically a different spin on what I just said, between, climate change, global warming, the plight of the farmer, we're just not going to have enough coffee. And so that started in 2009. So here we are 10 years later. And we still haven't hit that wall of not having enough coffee. But I do think keep bringing it to the forefront, and that's what makes the specialty coffee industry different, is we don't have a lot of grand answers, but we all agree we need to do something about it. Now, maybe we're not rallying enough, maybe we're not doing it hard enough, but I do think that's why we've made it this 10 years. I just think the next 10 years we've got to, kind of scream that from the pulpit a little louder.
Let me throw in at CoffeeCon New York in 2015. Who did we? Mary Pettit.
Mary Pettit, yeah, I served with her on the board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Formerly of the Colombian Federation.
Yeah, she ran the New York, or she was the vice president of the
Right.
New York, or the North American market.
Well, she spoke at our sustainability panel, and she said the industry needs to. Now, I don't know if she would say this today, but I just, if I want to, yeah, I just wanted to hear your reaction. She said that the industry needs to make peace with Robusta. And she said the other thing is they needed to. What was the other one? Well, let me let you answer that one first.
I agree with that. Yes, I'm a specialty coffee lover. Not a big fan of flavors or even cold brew. Or I like a good cup of drip hot coffee,
properly brewed drip
That's
coffee.
just my love, and it's very subjective. That said, but I do consult and help companies who maybe want to get into flavored coffees, and I get people, why would you want to do such a heinous thing, to ruin a great, the love of the farmer? Well, even the best farmers grow coffee that's not so good. And if we're really going back to what I said earlier, the plight of the farmer, we got to make sure all coffee is sold, not just the cream of the crop. To go in and say, hey, Kevin, you own a farm, and I'll pay a top dollar for anything that scores 86 plus on a Q. But the rest of it I don't really care
What
about.
do we do? Throw it out?
Yeah, is that really a partnership? Now, I'm not saying the average roaster needs to go buy good coffee and bad coffee, but we do need to make sure everything is grown. A Robusta, the average tree grows twice as much as an Arabica. It grows on a lower elevation. It's easier it fights disease and pest resistant. And few people know this, that, Robusta actually is the parent of Arabica in a way. It was, a naturally occurring mutation
so
years
really-
ago.
Okay, so it really is the original. Is that fair to say?
I won't say original. That's getting into genetics, and that could go. We can spend the
Okay,
next day
okay.
talking about that. But I would say, and there's also some well-known Arabica, Timur high reds, other type of varieties that have robust influence. It has strong rootstock. It fights disease.
Yeah.
Okay, so
So it's been brought in genetically anyway.
yeah, and I'm
for
not
its
supporting.
qualities.
I'm not saying all of us should run out there,
Ruera,
but I do know
13 or
it's
something.
misunderstood. Two, just personally, and I may invite you to this and force you to go through this, is I have made the comment in, roasting classes and others that I teach, that, we got to understand all coffee. It'll make you a better specialty coffee roaster. And I've done Robustas in my career. It was, running different companies. Somebody came to us and said, hey, we want an espresso with a Robusta in there because they read it in a book, or it was from Italy, or whatever the reason was.
Yeah.
I wasn't, it was under a label, and I looked at it, hey, as if it's going to keep, the roasters running and more work for my company, I'm going to go ahead and do it. And my mistake was, though, is that as little as I think I know about specialty and buying it and roasting it and all that, Robusta was, I called my importer, hey, Kevin, you got a Robusta? And yeah, I got one. And you sent it to me and I used it. I didn't look at multiple types. I didn't cup them. It was a Robusta. It was a Robusta. So I've got a project going on, a personal project, just to understand it better, where I've got about 22 different qualities of Robusta in my lab, and I'm going to put them through a few full cupping and or roasting them all. And I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it. It could be just something I file away, I will never do it again, or it could be, hey, this is how it's different, and how it could be used, because I have used it in blends to create things that surprise me, But so I keep an open mind when it comes to Robusta. But
I had a very early on, I knew a roaster in Denver named Ken Stevenson, and Ken insisted to me, he was from Australia, and he insisted to me that I had never had a really good Robusta. And I said, is there such a thing? I mean, it, kind of joking. And he said, oh, absolutely. And I believe it was from the Philippines. He said, these Robustas are don't get to the U.S., in fact, very often. And they're a different class of Robusta. And sure enough, he made up 5 pounds of it and sent it to me. And it was quite good, I have to say. I mean, it was quite good. The coffee was quite good.
Yeah, the thing is the just the value chain in a Robusta, those understand is I can go through the care and love that a farmer does, not only growing an Arabica coffee and what they do to nutrients in the soil and husbandry and the whole 9 yards, but then in processing and how they dry it properly and store it and care for it and grade it and sort it and go on and on and on. They don't do that in a Robusta. There's no money in it. So it's all those extra steps.
Right. So, but they're not just. But you are really making the point that's not because they're Robusta versus Arabica.
Well, it's a little bit because it's Robusta, but not really. There is.
But you're saying the potential isn't there.
Because if you look at the basic, just going back to the class I was teaching last week, professional roasting, we get into the chemistry of coffee. And you just look at the pure chemistry of what is in a Robusta bean, what is in an Arabica bean. Robusta, right out of the bat, twice the amount of caffeine. So that does count for a little of the bitterness. It has 50-60% more sugars. Well, more sugars caramelize, more flavors are developed, more sweetness. So there is kind of a black and white, this is why it tastes better, okay? But to completely be dismissive of it, and then when we get into new products in the industry, think of cold brew. Okay, one of the things I've done a lot of research and a lot of study and worked with a lot of companies in developing and the whole 9 yards, what coffees to put into it, how to roast it, how to get it done, how to biolage it, and then the whole food safety side of it, because you're now getting into an animal that's a little scary. Don't take this as I'm not saying blend and roast styles are not important in cold brew. They are not, or they are. Excuse me. But what I will tell you is that. Other things come into play that could make different qualities and different flavor profiles, such as what's found in a Robusta, interesting and maybe even wanted or needed components to alternative uses for coffee. Not that cold brew is really alternative, but you get it's different.
It certainly is.
But things like, I've developed in my career coffees for steak rubs. I've done some research and things like that. We now got cascara, which is the skin.
Right, of course.
And all these things with it. As a precaution as an industry, we've got to be a little careful because coffee is relatively safe from a food safety perspective. As we explore these new, have we really explored the hazards? And that's literally what happened to cascara, getting pushed back. It wasn't really. There is no known approved or even best practice for drying cascara and making sure that there's not basically molds and
Some
toxins
fermentation.
and
It's not particularly-
so it's being worked on. I know a few companies that are working on it very hard, but that's what happened to it. But these are all good things. So is there things we can do with Robusta and off grades and that still support the farmer but still drive specialty forward? I think so.
Yeah, well, maybe help subsidize specialty.
Exactly. So
Because if they can make a living, now it gets into the thing of if you can use it for wine, a lot of French wine. One year, I can't remember reading this somewhere, that a lot of the French wine that year went for went for motor fuel, because they could make more money.
mm-hmm.
So as an ethanol,
I don't know if I see that, but yeah.
Well,
I get the
it's
point.
hard to believe it if you love French wines as much
Right,
as I
exactly.
do. But it broke my heart to read it. But I'm also thinking, well, it probably wasn't the wines that we're trying to get a hold of.
Mm-hmm.
So, but anyway. Our roasting. Get to roasting for a second. You teach roasting to people.
Yeah. Believe
You
it or
have
not.
roasted on how many? Have you ever? I mean, have you ever roasted? I'm going to throw a few roaster names out and see if you've roasted on Diedrich. Obviously,
Yes,
the answer is yes.
yes.
Probat, I know.
Yes.
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 How about civets?
Yes, that was in fact, my first roast ever. So when I started at Gloria Jean's, then called Coffee Bean, we weren't roasting our own coffee. We had, if you remember, the Park Corporation in Barrington,
yeah,
Illinois.
yeah.
So they were more a commercial roaster, but they roasted 5 origins for us in 50-pound bags. And they were, thinking back, this was early in my career. It's hard to even give them a cup score, but I would say they were specialty, maybe a little lower. And we would just take and blend those coffees. And then one day we got a shipment of green coffee bags in. And, the roasted coffee bags were 50 pounds apiece. I can unload those and stack them myself. And here's 5-6 bags of 132 to 154 pounds. I'm in a warehouse by myself. It's a hot summer day. And so I unloaded. We had no forklift, no pallet jack. And so I walked into Ed's office and said, what do you want me to do with this? I think I swore, coffee. And sent it to our roaster. He goes, no, you're going to roast on that little unit in the corner of the roaster. And I said, that silver thing, that's never been turned on? Yeah. You got a handbook? No, you turn it on. You turn coffee green to brown.
He made it sound easy
and
good for your career.
Exactly. Well, I don't think I had a choice.
Yeah.
So the first roast, no prior experience, never had seen coffee green to brown, haven't read a book on it, hadn't done anything. It went green to brown, and it took about 10 minutes, which was a typical civets roast, which I found out years later,
Right.
Yeah, well, maybe a little short, but... And tasted it, and I was more of a tea drinker back then anyway, which was my first love. So it was tasted like coffee. My next roast caught fire. I had let it go too long, and then I took it out of the roaster to get it out because it was on fire or embers, and put it into a plastic garbage can that proceeded to melt. And Ed came out and basically... Because of you, nobody's getting paid this week, so people can't eat. It's all on you, Mike. But here's a business card to a roasting school class at Probat in California. So I flew out, and that was my first organized class. And yes, it was a Probat trying to sell you a roaster, but it was training, and we didn't touch roasters. We cupped and sample roasted a little bit, but we didn't really do much beyond that. But that was my first formal training in roasting. So flash forward to... in early 2000, when I was luckily enough to help start the Roasters Guild, which was really the true story behind that was somebody said, who wants to lead it? And everyone else sat down, and I was paying attention to someone else. True story.
No.
But anyway, we sat down, and when we started the Roasters Guild, our we were first day, our first meeting, first half day of the meeting, the first was whether we should let greenies in or not. We weren't going to let importers in because we didn't want to be sold to at events.
Right.
We eventually
non-stop pitch.
agreed we need somebody to pay for the beer and the meals and sponsors, so we decided we'd let them in.
We have the same philosophy at Coffee Con about that.
So we let them in, but they had to sign an oath that roasting was an integral part of their profession. So at least, and we really prohibited selling at retreats and stuff. But anyway, that was we wanted to start a community. We wanted to start, we wanted a roasting handbook, which still to this day isn't done, which remind me about that in a second, because I have a philosophy on that. But it was training, because all of us had taken, we'd taken a course at Probat. Agtron, Carl Staub offered some wonderful science courses out in Nevada.
Kind of like an EST workshop.
Yes.
I know Carl.
So, and we all wanted, because what we're beginning to believe is that the books we were reading maybe weren't as factual. We were discovering different things, whether it's roasting, brewing, anything in the coffee chain. We were discovering, this doesn't seem to be what I've been told, or there's more to this. We just had all kinds of questions, and a lot of us we were director of coffees in our company. So what that meant back in the day was, not only did we buy all the coffee, we managed the roasting staff. We handled FDA, organic compliance. When a big customer came, we were the ones that gave the big dog and pony show. But we had all gone through this consolidation of the industry, which, happens, it's probably 6 times since I've been in the industry, but this was the first one. And we were the ones being marginalized. We were the ones like, director, why are you important? All you want to do is buy more expensive coffee and throw it out when it gets stale. So we were not important in this new, but we wanted to kind of legitimize our craft, if we were.
Sure.
So that was one of the key tenets of the Roasters Guild, was to start a roaster education program. And it took us 15 years because we had no idea what we were getting into, and it led to the Specialty Coffee Associations of America's program, and we merged with Europe. It's now the Coffee Skills program, and in brewing, barista, green, sensory, and roasting. And there's 3 levels of each of them, and I teach them all. But the interesting thing, just to go back to the education, though, is all the other pathways. Brewing, as you probably well know. I mean, the early brew studies were done in the 1950s.
Yes, correct.
They're being redone now.
With this equipment.
Yeah, exactly. So brewing, not that there's not still we want to learn and things I still kind of go, ooh, I don't know if that's right, when I taste something. But generally, the science is there. Okay, I would like to see it more complete. There's maybe a little weakness on grind and things like that, but it's generally there. Barista by default, sort of the same thing because it's still brewing. Green coffee, that pathway is, it's that product's been studied pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
It's there's a lot of, so when we write curriculum, because this morning I was actually on a call. I still serve on the educational council, and I oversee the creator groups. Not to say, hey, that's correct info, but they've pointed to some research. It's not just somebody's personal dogma, that they have something to back it up. And in all the curriculum, sensory, our whole cupping format, the Q, is based on sensory analysis from college textbook. I mean, Ted, I love him to death. He stole shamelessly and gave us those protocols. So 4 out of the 5 modules, there is a ton of written data, white papers, books. Roasting. There is the host of authors, the Scott Rao, the Robert Hooses, have written some books, but there's not really the definitive book on roasting. And that was one of our missions when we started. And I remember a good friend of mine, Paul Thornton, you may know him from formerly with Coffee Bean International and Farmer Brothers. Now he's got his own Thornton family roaster. He is one of my good friends. I met him at the Agtron seminar a year after the Probot, so I've known him forever. And he was the first one that, as I was the first chair of the Roasters Guild, I said, you're the smartest one who knows this, you're going to do this. And then he turned it on to somebody else, and so for 10 years, I know the people that had that as their responsibility as they served on the council, and we still don't have a handbook. Now, there's some political reasons. There is some, we're all volunteers as well. So there's many of these factors.
Council.
But there's another part of me that believes, because I get asked this all the time, teaching roasting class, why can't you give me a manual? And it's like, because I think every time we think we know it, we really look at each other and go, no, we think there's a little bit more to that, So it's really kind of this, and now I'm teaching it, which is kind of come full circle. So it's.
Have you read Sivet's?
Yes, what I can of it, because he speaks a language that's.
Well, he's his own, but he did come from the traditional coffee industry. It wasn't
solubles.
Quite.
Solubles.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a chemical engineer.
Yeah,
practically.
no, I mean he's certainly opinionated, and this has got to be a horrible time to raise this to anyone in the audience, but I realize we're talking about all these people that There needs to be a guidebook while we're going through these names. But Michael Sivitz basically, and stop me again if I'm wrong. I think Michael Sivitz had a lot to do. There were several characters, characters, I've used the word advisedly, who created the specialty coffee industry, and I think Mike Sivitz was definitely one of them.
He's one of them in that group.
He had a shop roaster that worked like a popcorn air popper, and in a way it was very radical for its time. There's still people. I participated on a Facebook page to do with fluid roasting, and where there was an argument, challenge about this anyway. But even the amount of time it takes, Mike would say it takes less time to roast. But really, it's an incredible invention that had a lot to do with people, going and getting these Sivitz roasters and opening a shop.
He was quite the curmudgeon.
Oh, he was also a very argumentative person.
I still have a letter from him 2 years after we started the Roasters Guild.
Okay.
We were successful, and we were looking for roaster manufacturers to donate a roaster for the weekend.
Yeah.
Which was pretty grandiose because roasting equipment, it's not just the expense of shipping a $25,000 roaster to a retreat in the middle of nowhere. It has to be ducted, it has to be set up, it has to, so it was a big ask. And he refused because we were going to taste coffee in the lingual method. Ted and him did this all the time.
Yeah.
So anyway, about a year after that, he sent me a letter saying, Mr. Michael Ebert, chair of the Roasters Guild, I respectfully request that you change the name of Roasters Guild to Drum Roasters Guild because you don't know anything about air roasting. Sincerely, Michael Sivitz. I still have that as a but no, those are the luminaries. I mean, now I do a lot of teaching on Dietrich. I have a relationship with them where I'm doing all their teaching both at our lab and in Ponderay, Idaho, and so I've had to go deep into the Stephen Dietrich philosophy. Okay,
Yes.
I've already been deep into Michael Sivitz's philosophy when it comes to roasting, and there are other what I will call luminaries in the industry and you listen to them and you have no question that you're sucked in and think that's the only way to roast,
Right.
and their philosophy is great. And the only thing I do know after all this time is they're all right. I have had fantastic coffee. You name a coffee roaster.
I have to say, I've had some great coffee done in Sivitz roasters.
Yeah. So have I.
And also there's, and again, I feel like here I am. I'm before one of the masters of roasting, and I'm not. I'm a horrible home roaster, as Pat will tell you off camera. I'm sure she'll probably say it on camera. But I
just wanted to see the look in her eyes.
I've ruined a few events because of smoking the house up. Anyway, the air. Isn't it true that at this point, at this stage in a Probat roaster, a Dietrich roaster, they are in fact using lift technology in their roaster that could also be said to be somewhat air roasting. They're not, in other words, just two different.
First off, understand that a Probat and most other drum roasters are still 80% convection, only 20% conduction heat.
Okay, so really,
Dietrich, he believed that he wanted a longer drying phase in the beginning of the roaster, be more gentler during the beginning of Maillard reaction caramelization, so be a little gentler. So that's where his infrared. But he is still 70%, or a Dietrich convection, only 30% conduction.
And to put that into coarse English, it's air.
Yeah. Convection being air, conduction being it's touching something that's hot.
Contact.
I have not seen, because one of the things is I'm not a master. I just do it a lot. That I've made a lot of mistakes, and somewhere along the line you pick up something here and there.
Probably a good definition of master, but
it is. I do think that. But a few years ago, I was at a Roasters Guild retreat, and up on during the lunch panel, they had a roaster rep from all the roaster manufacturers, and they all got their, 30 seconds to give their spiel, and they all shot out what I was just saying. They were 80%, 20% this, we're that, da. And I went around asking them, so I want to know the formula. Like, how do you figure out that why is yours 80 and yours is 70? There's got to be some ratio of air and beans and size, and there is. You know, Carl Schmidt, formerly a Probot, now with Dietrich. I've asked this many times, and he's explained it to me, but I still don't understand it.
Yeah, well,
but even
sure
a Civets is not 100% convection air.
oh,
It's still,
actually not. No,
yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah.
We
Now,
all-
what percentage? I don't know. A Lorraine is up there with higher convection than a drum. They claim it's close to 100%. I think it's personally can't see how it can't be much higher than 90% because the Lorraine still has a drum cavity. It's just not a drum, you know.
Where is
but-
Ian Burston when you need him? I mean, Ian, you got to be out there on this. I'm surprised you. We'll have to put it in to get you to react because I'm sure you'll argue with us either way. But I mean, it's right. I mean, it's got to.
But they all impart, you know, as we both said, I've had great coffees in every single one of them.
Yeah.
If they're buying good coffee and they know what to do with it, it could be delicious. But they all do taste different.
And the consumer has never been taught. Maybe probably I would love to change this, but the consumer has never been taught to associate, or to even care. I mean, I don't know of a single. I'm sure there's somebody, but I don't know of a single
You know,
brand
that's a good point because
that brings up how it's roasted. I actually flame roast was at one time, was it Stewart's? There was some company that wasn't really considered specialty.
oh yeah,
They used to claim their roast method.
well, you know, I get asked all the time teaching roasting classes. They want to know the answer, so I tell them 42. Do you get it? Do you get it? Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
oh, I know. I know.
I've actually
I
said
thought it
that
was
in
something
every single
coffee. Yeah,
class,
okay.
and it took probably a year of telling classes till there was a guy in a class I was teaching in L.A. who was he was a dentist who semi-retired and bought a coffee farm in Costa Rica, and then decided I better go learn about coffee. So he took a roasting class, and he
the
was
right
like
order.
he was like 6'8", and he was in the back of class, and he was the first one who got that joke, and I said 42. Anyway. I lost my train of thought. It had to do with different types of roasters.
Well,
but
no
each one of them,
no one's marketing it.
right? Well, I get asked all the time, how would I market? You know, what would you want on a label, Mike? You know, because we have these conversations of seeing coffee, you know, on a label or on a menu, having 60 different, you know, words describing how that coffee tastes, and probably 3/4 of them I've never associated with coffee. But what I want is I want to know the country.
Yeah.
I want to know a processing method. I want to know a roast level in Agtron. Okay, so a degree of roast and a number that's not French roast or Vienna. It's an actual number, and a varietal. If I know those, I'm pretty good with wine, not great. I know pretty much what I could expect in the cup. The final piece would be type of roasting, but those first four most consumers don't understand. We add roast, it's just going to confuse them even more, you know.
I think it's not been done, and I definitely think it matters. But also, as we've just said, you can get good coffee with either one of them. It looks like we have 5 minutes left. Is that right?
Oh, and we haven't brewed our.
We haven't brewed some coffee.
Oh,
Let's brew some coffee.
let's brew some coffee.
Okay, and then let's. But I'm having such a good time. I hope the audience is. But I'm having such a good time. It doesn't matter. I'm just glad to have you here, and talking to us about all this stuff. Well, let's talk about the future in the last few minutes.
The future.
What's next? Well, I mean, you've actually touched on this anyway. But I mean, what really is? For instance, are people? I was just in a cafe the other night. I noticed just as many people ordering lattes. I noticed just as many people ordering using cream and sugar. Is that changing?
It's probably growing. I'm in the middle of doing some market research for a client, and just analyzing the additive market, and everything from traditional creamers, sugar, to plant-based dairy alternatives are huge at the moment, and where they're going. And only from all the reports and things I've looked at is drip coffee in the average specialty coffee cafe. Again, that's a little how to define that with some of these reports, because people what is a specialty coffee cafe versus average, and they all, it looks like, drip brewed coffee is 23% of sales. 49 some percent is espresso based on average, and the rest is made up between just oddball.
49% is
but
espresso.
up to 73% of all consumers add something to their coffee. And
Especially espresso.
yeah.
I mean, that's anecdotal. I haven't studied it like you have, but I would just say.
So it's important. It's not going away. We shouldn't want it to go away. If more coffee's consumed, it goes back to my very first comment.
Right. What's the problem? Why is it that there seems to be a need for people to tell people what to do, how to enjoy something?
Well, I think it's a fine line between differentiation and being a little pompous and arrogant is the only way I can put it. Because we all want to differentiate our product. So people ask me, what's my favorite roast style? It's a medium roast. Okay, what is medium roast to me? Somewhere between first and second crack temperature. So that would be, and not that I don't appreciate a good light roast or a dark roast. I think dark roast is a lost art. I do feel the what we'll call the newer generation. I won't say third wave because I don't even understand that term anymore. Maybe went a little too light, but I still teach light roasting in my classes because in the mid '90s when I was first named director of coffee at Gloria Jean's, I took all our coffees from we were chasing Starbucks and Pete. They were the dark. I said, I appreciate that done well, but I like most of my coffees roasted lighter. So I switched the whole line basically to that medium roast. A couple lighter, but that was it. And I had people who do what I do for a living now, calling Ed and Gloria saying, "Mr. Ebert doesn't know how to roast. He's roasting way too light." And I took a little offense to that. I go, because this wasn't just me doing it for my dogma. This was me tasting coffees roasted many different ways, going, I like this, and then going, hey, Kevin, what do you think?
It's always,
and I would pass it around, and people said, oh, yeah, I think there's more flavor there. So, and so I don't want to be that to the younger generation that's doing this lighter, which I call the sweet sour roast, but I have had flavors in coffees that I do go back to. It's the farmer, and then it's the storage and transport and the roaster. But it's also that barista, that front of the line is brewing coffee in ways that's like, wow. And, and sometimes it requires a lighter roast. So I don't want to be that curmudgeon, so to speak.
Yeah, no, I know.
If you can find, Mr. Espresso out west, he destroys every rule I have in roasting. 20-some minute roast with wood burning. It is the delicious espresso.
It's fabulous.
It's delicious.
It's fabulous. So,
anyway.
Luigi and John are...
Yeah. They've been on this, haven't they? Haven't one of them been on this before?
Yeah,
I thought so.
And they're. I love their coffee. We've even tried to get them to come to other cities because I said there's nobody in Chicago that roasts like you do.
Exactly.
Nobody.
I don't think there's anyone in the country that roasts like you.
I really don't think there is, and it's a real thing. And there's certain roasters that Henry's the same thing. Another Bay Area roaster that does his own roast. There's no one that roasts like he does, whether you like it or not. It's unique, and it is its own style. So you gotta love that. And I think the one thing that people have to understand if they're going to get into coffee, there's no such thing as it's not a food safety issue in any event. It's whether it's too dark, it's not. It's not a problem, or if it's too light, it's not a problem. It's not going to get you sick. It just might make you not like the coffee, but it's not a health issue. Yeah,
exactly.
So I definitely would agree with that. I think that people. Hang on, can you hand me that? I'm going to brew the coffee just because. Now Mike does a great. I'm going to let Mike do one thing. I'm going to let you stir it.
My special way.
It's team barista.
So you give me too much credit. So what he's referring to is one of the second or the first Coffee Con.
Yeah.
He asked me to be involved. I was working for Altera at the time. That's now Colectivo.
That's right.
And you asked me to teach a class and wanted Altera to be involved. And Altera, I couldn't get the ownership to bite. So I said, can I get a table? I'll teach a class for free. And what do you want me to teach? And so I think you told me a week before You had nobody to teach a siphon.
We didn't.
So what I did is I had brewed on a siphon, but I didn't feel confident. So for the next week, I brewed siphons for nonstop. And you came in and I did something that, which I think I remember that you never seen before, and asked kind of the origin of it and how it was done. And then you had it and said it was one of the best you ever had. And it's kind of, whew, good.
It
You
was
liked it.
fabulous. Yeah, no, it was great.
Yeah, siphons are big in Asia. Yeah,
They are,
they're
and they're
huge.
big. Of course, every time we do LA, I go to the siphon area, which is of LA, the Asian
Right.
area, and all the siphon bars. And I never get them to show up because they're usually two-person shops. And one says, well, Saturday night or Saturday is a big day for us. Obviously, it's a big day for us too. So we can never get them to show up. But it's a very cool method. And this is Hario, and they're one of my favorites. I think this is right. You want me to put it in here now? Is
Yeah.
it ready?